Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you Chapter 17 of the Veil Riders Book 4. Like, subscribe, comment down below. Let's go. Chapter 17. On the Move. War, despite Yule's wishes, waits for no one, and his enemy had been the first to make the opening moves of the year. A rogue satyr that went by the name of Chin Chesper had used the chaos of the conflict to seize a slew of towns and old forts, following the example of Prince Nim. This meant that there were now two rogues within Lower Alberdand, the Rogue Son and the Tiny Lord. They were, honestly, both tremendous headaches for Yule, and the power of the eye roll when he read the reports could have moved clouds. Chin Chesper had sent an envoy to meet with Yule, which ended up being a rather tired and haggard female satyr that had traveled the entire way on foot. They were offering both trade and access to the lands that Yule knew were likely enduring a severe struggle under the weight of Southern Elf advances. Regardless, they were a supply of bodies and information, so Yule made a point of making their first stop in that location. Broom troopers and steam trucks were constantly going back and forth along the refuel roads. The stress relief of fuel meant that more flights could be issued for Overwatch, as well as harassing enemy units. Cheyenne assault wings were already tangling with Apache response teams over ores and tall wheat, the aerial gun battles fierce and constantly at a stalemate. Cheyenne pilots and their gunners were finding Apache's troublesome quarry, while Apache pilots and their own gunners found the agility and speed of the Cheyenne provided a teeth-sucking amount of anxiety. Pilot Broly Forwin, a female brim-touched whose family was killed in ores, was the first to actually down an Apache in air-to-air battle. Screaming across the treetops towards a patrol of 3 craft, she performed a bowing double turret, hitting hard G's into the vertical and using the rear rotor to perform a hanging low-speed stall. This allowed her and her gunner to train both of their turrets onto a single Apache, raking it with 40mm anti-vehicle grenades and 30mm chain gun rounds. She then proceeded to harass and hound the still airborne Apaches into enemy territory, only turning around in order to outrun and avoid surface-to-air missile fire. The downing of an Apache in air-to-air combat was a huge boon for morale, and Yule's subcommanders in Alberdand began to launch offensives on Yule's orders. This, of course, produced an equal response by the enemy, and soon Abrams and Bradleys were squaring up to DJ-93s and the modernized Puma scout cars. Oil and blood was spilling freely into the first breaths of the Near-Tot-Way month, and Yule knew that he was no good in friendly territory. Coco appeared to also share the sentiment, and landed a surprise fleet of 30 Hueys outside Valhalla Hill, along with a full complement of Veil Riders and his own hand-picked veteran auxiliary troopers. Yule was quite overjoyed to see his old friend again in person, laughing loudly as Coco sprinted out of a chopper passenger bay and tackled the other human to the ground. The time for meetings, however, was short. Coco and Yule knew they had to have boots on ground within Alberdand, now established as the main front of the war, as well as expand west in order to try and wrap their enemy in a tidy area of control. Difficult, to be sure, but doable with enough elbow grease. Alavara was naturally a raging inferno when Yule told her she had to stay behind, but not even she could argue now that she was so far along. Yethis would be traveling with Yule, as well as his entire tactical command structure, along with the new face that had yet to experience modernized war. Little Ear Nimmy would also be going with Yule in order to take care of household duties, as well as report to Alavara the comings and goings of Yule while out in the field. Nimmy, of course, had ulterior motives for this, but she was quite careful to keep her mind as quiet as possible around Alavara. Combat Outpost Stitch was chosen to be the main mustering ground of this combined arms wing of both Cosbling Company and Zerg Company. Along the main road between Karas Vale and Tallwheat, also known as the Big Steam Highway, multiple refuel stations and cops had been set up. Fuel Depot Bluebird was the first refuel station after entering Alberdand, after which was Cop Stitch, Fuel Depot Robin, Cop Charlie Horse, Fuel Depot Mockingbird, and then Cop Canker. After Canker was Tallwheat proper, which was blooming into a huge city of defiance to Raktur, the main capital of the Alberdand royal family. Mercenaries were showing up in droves in order to war for coin, camping outside Cop Stitch and waiting for the contractual offices to open. Many of these mercs for hire were human civilians, either coming free under Yule's command or sneaking away from Fey bases of control. Far more were locals though, wearing a mishmash of armors, gear, weapons, and magical artifacts gained from curious means. Banditry would be high, of course, but that was merely a side effect of war. Valhalla Hill was a blur of movement, but it did not take long until nearly 30,000 fresh troopers hit Cop Stitch, along with both commanders of the Vale Riders being side by side for the first time since the Vale had been compromised. The Cop ballooned in troop count, both as a base and as a massive tent city. Coco and Yule did not reside for long. They were in Apache range, and so many troops in one place would be too tempting a target. Vale Riders poured across the land in a wave, armor and scout car rolling down roads to hammer the southern elves and Fey with the weight of their freshly produced might. Broom troops zipped soundlessly through the night, and after a mere week of time, fires constantly danced along the horizon from hit-and-run broom assaults. The brooms were working out so well and the fighting so effective in causing chaos that the Southern Elf and Fey forces actually stumbled to a halt in their operations, having to quickly wrangle the overwhelming havoc being dropped onto their lines. The Vale Riders had blackened the eyes of the Fey so quickly that they managed to make their entire military command stumble backwards, giving the Vale Riders a full week to dig in, establish, and stabilize their lines. The flinch did not last long, and broom troopers were now contending against shotgun-wielding Fey troopers with night vision optics. Coco and Yule had found themselves sitting quite smugly when they arrived at Old Stop, the current capital of the tiny lord Chin Chesper. The capital was more akin to an ancient and battered fortress getting a new coat of paint, but Yule appreciated the satyr's gumption in at least fixing it up. The two humans were sitting atop the cabin of a steam-powered dragon wagon while waiting for the Lord to arrive, both of them enjoying a small snack of dried fruit that Nimmy had rustled up for them from the quartermaster. Only a matter of time before the Fae get around to taking their daggers to us, Coco murmured, tapping a map that was across his knee. We've cut a line from Birdwell to Blencoe, and we're dug in like ticks, but their aircraft will prove troublesome. Yule shrugged. We have some manners of keeping them at bay. The gremlin firing systems are better than nothing. Have you seen the new GTA missiles? The pencil-thin rods of mithril wrapped in explosive compound? Yeah, I've seen them. Coco chuckled. I've never seen a missile shoot lightning before. I don't know who is scared more, the aircraft or the poor bastard firing the thing. They've issued a troubleshoot of implanting a grounding line to reduce the discharge. Yule said with a wry smile, they're working on a permanent fix. Coco popped a dry berry into his mouth. Have they fixed the issue with the gremlins trying to perform stunts with the missile? I saw a projectile try and glory kill a fake helicopter target by doing a kickflip before it struck. Unfortunately, we will have to contend with the mood of the gremlins. Not that they ever go away. As soon as they detonate the missile, they just float back into a catcher and are put into the next missile. Did you know the gremlins recognize each other? Veteran missile gremlins will trade chatter with the launcher gremlins. Yule sighed out, quiet for a moment in thought before tapping his own map that he had across his lap. These two big forests are going to give me fits. The Mother's Forest and Old Kingswood are massive gaps in the line, and I have very little doubt that shit is going to get ugly in there. Coco folded up his map. Going to get ugly regardless. The hardware for the Fae is fully fleshed out now, and I have been getting reports of even more nasty surprises coming our way. Are you talking about the magical cyborgs? Yule asked, turning to look at Coco as they locked eyes. Yeah? Coco said, his face now grim. Them. Reports had been light at first, merely whisperings and inklings of a new project by the Fae to create a tougher, deadlier human. When the first variant arrived across the Wrangled Vale and were put into their stasis chamber, our spies were scared stiff. Yule popped a dried piece of fruit into his mouth, already knowing what was coming as Coco tucked his map into his breast pocket. You hear about who they have leading them? Coco asked Yule quietly, as if he were a hunter tiptoeing around a sleeping bear. Yule stared hard into the far distance, watching the far market of Old stop bustle in their morning rituals. He was quiet for a long, long minute, then nodded once, slowly. Yeah, I've heard. Coco looked at the man out the corner of his eyes but said nothing, instead slapping his knees when he spotted a small gathering of people coming down the main street, flanked by armed guards. Well, that's him then. Let's get going. Yule didn't reply, just spitting out a fruit pit that ended up not getting removed. Yule's expectations were low, since the last rogue lord he had met in this area had been Prince Nim, but the tiny lord turned out to be right up his alley. Chin-Chesper was a satyr, as Yule knew, but appeared to be one of the ram varieties, a long set of curved horns sitting on either side of his head and shaggy fur peeking out from well-tailored but plain pants. His eyes were a dull red with tired lids, and his shaggy hair was tied back into a hasty warrior's bun. He carried himself more like a soldier, or as much of a soldier that the more effeminate race could manage. Before Chin-Chesper could offer his hand, Yule offered his instead as Coco grinned at the satyr. You don't dress like a rogue lord, Yule murmured, smiling kindly at Chin-Chesper as the satyr happily shook his larger hand.
Fanciful lords are easier to spot and faster to kill,
Chin-Chesper said defiantly, his accent so neutral it almost seemed practiced.
I learned quite quickly I am safer in my old commoner's clothing. I can just afford better material now.
Coco held out his hand, shook Lord Chespin's, then nodded approvingly. I like him better than Nim.
Nim is a dandy and was raised in the courts. I was a woodworker who saw a gap in the frame to be exploited,
Chin-Chesper stated, crossing his arms and showing off his far stronger muscle structure.
You two are clever little humans. You know precisely what I did and why I did it when I did.
Yule leaned back a little, placing his hands on his hips as little-eared Nimmy stepped up beside him, having been lingering behind during the meeting. Her appearance caused both Chin-Chesper and his motley retinue to raise their eyebrows all at once. You took advantage of the freeze, according to my scouts, and used militia forces to sweep in and rip these towns from the local towns guard. You killed... Chin-Chesper held up his hand, face firm and set.
I did no killing.
Apologies. Your men killed any runners and messengers, so word never got out. Then spent the entirety of the ice seasons getting support from Nim to fortify your position. Yule finished, holding out his hands in a mild apology.
Let's see the town while we walk.
Chin-Chesper said with a nod, then waved a hand to his retinue so he could walk along with Yule and Coco.
Nim was kind enough to offer us manpower and money, but more to see us as another thorn in the side of his father and the Fae forces. We are being swamped with refugees fleeing the southern lands, as the Alberdon Valley Elves and Southern Elves are pushing out anyone not of elven lineage. Resources are low, and stressors are high.
We can help with that quite easily, Coco said warmly, rubbing the pads of his hands together with circular rasps of flesh. We've been teaching everyone in the Confederation far more advanced growing techniques, as well as the good folks up in the Ironani Highlands, and we already have more grain than we know what to do with. Chin-Chesper shook his rammed horned head.
It is not grain nor ale that we need.
He sighed out, staring out across the many ramshackle homes.
We are meager stalks of straw set upon by the weight of the world. My people need a foundation, a clean slate to build upon. Without the aid of Nim, we would have never gotten here, and without the Veil Riders, we will be swept away like leaves in a stream.
Well, lucky for you, Yule's a bleeding heart, Coco said brightly as he turned to Yule, who had narrowed his eyes. Ain't that right, buddy? Yule slowly rolled his head around to look at Coco while Nimmy quietly giggled from beside him. Then he looked down at Chin Chesper. Your kingdom lays within our area of operation. I believe we can come to an agreement where we can fortify towns and cities with modern gear. For a fee, of course.
I am fully aware that nothing comes free, and I have been made even more aware of your rather mercantile ways. Odd for a warlord.
Chin Chesper said with a wink, running a finger down the bottom of his left ram's horn.
We can discuss guilders in my chambers. Please, follow me.
The walk to the official chambers of Chin Chesper was brief, as the old fort was not exactly large, and Yule could tell just by rough estimates that even Valhalla Hill dwarfed it. The tiny lord's royal office was maybe the size of an NCO's barracks room, tidy and ringed with walls of shelves, and his desk was a chaotic sprawl of ledgers, books, scrolls, and sheafs of paper. Due to the size, he had Nimmy wait out in the calling hall.
Viff!
Chin Chesper called out, waving his hands to two chairs as Yule and Coco followed him in.
Viffy! Where's that damned golem?
Yule raised a brow. Golem? The last golem that Yule had seen had been the massive ones that assaulted them at Tallwheat, and he was curious as to how he had missed one while walking around.
Yes, some old Saren golem someone found wandering around after the Battle of Oars.
Chin Chesper said with another wave of his hand.
She is currently earning a little bit of money temping for me.
She? Yule asked, even more confused. Coco, however, seemed more focused on something else, as he squinted his eyes and spoke openly. Temping? We have temps? There are temping agencies?
Of course there are.
Chin Chesper said with his own squint.
Do you think people spend their entire lives being a secretary or paperwork runner? There are so many refugees running around that it required the creation of a labor guild.
A soft yet heavy series of steps came down the hallway, both Yule and Coco turning to see the golem step into view. The golem had dull green hair that looked like overgrown moss and vines, though their body was clearly comprised of polished wood, woven steel and brass to mimic muscle cording, gold, and silver. The golem's clothing was more akin to armor, sporting a rugged and well-bruised pair of angular pauldrons, vambraces, and gauntlets that served as their arms. Making up their chests was a once perfect chest plate, their neck surrounded by a high-collar gorget. Despite its clearly combat-focused facade, the golem's carved face was plain, with neither nose nor mouth marking it. Their eyes seemed bored, or annoyed. In each pair of frosty blue eyes was carved spheres of periston, the pupils cut into squares. The golem looked at Yule and Coco blandly, then looked at Chin Chesper, moving their hands around in Doki Koki, a sign language invented by the Amantu to communicate underwater. I'll be damned, it's talking with its hands, Yule, Coco murmured, watching as the golem's hands blurred in rapid speech. Is your amulet picking up on anything? Yule shook his head, then cocked a brow. Why the fuck does a golem need money? The golem abruptly stopped signing, then slowly turned its head towards Yule, fixing him with a tired, sardonic look. What? Yule asked it. It's a fair question. Coco, still baffled, gestured towards the golem. Do you have any idea how rare that thing is? It has braided wire arms to look like muscle. How's it even talking?
Viffy is a rare breed. A golem made by the Fae before the Great War.
Chin Chesper said while still watching the golem's hands.
She has advanced processing centers in her head, extremely valuable ores of precious stone that are infused with spellcraft. Viffy is as lifelike as they come.
Yule and Coco shared a look, both of them knowing what the other was thinking. They had been made aware of a lot of things magic could do, and both of the humans knew that life-like could only come from the expense of actual life. So, what is it saying? Yule asked the satyr, the two having been talking back and forth wordlessly for several moments. Chinchesper let out a huff of breath.
She is angry that one of your vehicles nearly hit her as she was crossing the street with groceries, and she got into an argument with some of your human soldiers. One of them said, "Quit flapping your fingers at me, Helen Keller," and she is demanding to know who that is.
Coco let out a bark of a laugh, followed by a strained wheeze as Yule shook his head from side to side, eyes closed. The golem, Viffy, crossed its arms and rapidly tapped their Sabaton-styled foot, waiting for the answer it demanded. "Helen Keller," Yule started, his voice wearing its humored strain and aggravation openly, "was a deaf, dumb, and blind mute that spoke via a hand-based language such as Doki Koki." Before Yule had even finished his sentence, the golem was rapidly and angrily signing at Chinchesper.
"We all know you're not blind and dumb, Viffy,"
the satyr cried out, though he hung his head back as the golem stepped forward in a frustrated manner. It began signing very slowly and deliberately in front of Chinchesper's face, and Yule had never seen anyone move their hands in such a "I'll fucking have you know" tone.
"No one is saying you aren't a highly advanced and aware automaton, and no one is implying you are useless. Honestly, Viff, you know how the humans are by now."
Chinchesper said with an eye roll, even as the golem soundlessly huffed and crossed their arms again. Yule, watching the entire scene with open, astonished eyes, gave them a few blinks before pointing an idle finger at Viffy. "It is extremely lifelike for a golem. I have never seen something that wasn't alive pout before."
She is, as I said, an older and highly advanced specimen of golem, usually reserved for bodyguards or house attendants. Having a golem made of precious metals as a butler was very in style during the older reigns of the Fae.
Chinchesper said as he sat down in his chair, then turned to the golem with tired eyes.
"Could you bring us some of the coffee that was captured during that skirmish? I think these chaps would appreciate a taste of their homeland."
The golem nodded, closing her eyes as she bowed before turning and stepping out of the room. "Be nice to have an actual cup of coffee again," Coco said, eagerly rubbing his hands together. Yule had watched the golem go, his eyes slowly narrowing as a thought occurred to him. "I doubt the butler golems wore suits of armor. That means this one is one of the bodyguard variety." The room was quiet, and Chinchesper was highly aware of what Yule was asking. He pursed his lips, then rested his elbows on his desk, setting his chin atop his crossed fingers.
"I know what you're getting at. And no, I don't know what she's capable of. Her armor bore a lot of old damage before she got it repaired, and she must have seen a terrible amount of fighting before becoming buried by rubble. Golems were left behind when the Fae left. Many were hunted for their parts, harvested for their precious metals, or hid away in the world, forgotten over time. Some stay hidden for so long they die, never turning themselves back on and becoming lost to the elements."
"Are there more?" Coco asked, pointing a bent finger towards the door. "Or like that one?" Chinchesper nodded his head from side to side in a waffling motion.
"Kind of, sort of. You will find golems like her running round, the darlings. They are a close approximation of Viffy, but they lack something in their creation."
"A soul?" Yule asked aloofly. Chinchesper pressed his lips together, his face suddenly sour as if he had smelled something foul.
"Yes. Well, the Reknikim enchanters were a rather powerful class of Fae, and they sometimes did things they truly should not have. There is a reason behind the clash of Fae and God."
Both humans looked at the satyr expectantly, and he leaned back in his chair, sighing out in a tiredness that stretched to his soul.
The satyr histories are older. Much older than anything the Confederation has, and are kept secret by oral tradition. The Fae were keen to become gods in their own right, and were dabbling into far more eclectic, darker, African arts. This went as far as to create the golems, but to take it even farther.
Chin Chesper began, setting his hands on his desk and relacing them together as he chewed over the words. He started again with a weak shrug.
It all revolves around life. Controlling life, imbuing life. The Fae had begun researching a way to strip bare a soul, harnessing the energy and implanting it within far more precious golem processing gems.
Yule nodded once, then nodded his head sideways towards the door. She has a stolen soul, doesn't she?
She doesn't know.
Chin Chesper said firmly, being one of the few people on Scapira Alara to point a finger at Yule directly.
And she doesn't need to know. It will do her no good. Whatever soul is inside her will be there until her gem is broken, and she does not need to bear the burden of that knowledge. Understand? Let the golem live her life however long it may be, without the weight of that knowledge.
Yule lowered his eyebrows at the satyr, causing Chin Chesper to suddenly remember who he was talking to and to quickly withdraw his pointed finger. Despite the aggressive gesture, Yule drew in a deep breath before looking over at Coco. We'll keep it to ourselves. How many of these golems are there?
There are 400 active golems, as far as I can reckon.
Chin Chesper replied.
Some will eventually be drawn further east, such as Viffy. They are feeling pulled to the area for some reason.
The satyr's voice died as soon as Viffy the golem returned, bearing a large tray of cups, dishes of sugar, small cakes, and an elegantly spouted coffee pot. While she poured Chin Chesper's cup for him, she let the two humans pour their own, clearly still miffed about being called Helen Keller by the race. Coco quietly chuckled to himself while pouring his own cup of coffee, while Yule poured milk into his own cup. Once the two had finished getting their cups ready, the real talks began.
How much?
Chin Chesper asked after letting the two humans enjoy half their cups, unmolested by questions and simply enjoying the moment. Coco raised his head first, smacking his lips before he spoke. There is a scale of pay system we have in place. That way it is fair for king and lord alike. After paying your dues, our services come into play immediately. We will patrol your roads and maintain them, as well as take on the duties for combat beyond what you may assist with. We only maintain borders. We do not go on the assault. Obviously, you can also opt in to the collaboration agreements, Yule said, picking up after Coco. If you allow us to build a garrison post in a town, that town is then provided access to vehicle agreements, technological upgrade agreements, and the like. There are other things we can discuss, but that is more reliant on how much you can afford. Chin Chesper's desire and greed for Yule and Coco's help was obvious and open on his face, and he stared hard at the space between the two humans for a few minutes before speaking.
How much?
He said quietly, knowing the bill was not going to be light. When Yule told him the going rate for the full package, the satyr's face paled at the tally.
That is... well, I knew it would not be cheap.
Chin Chesper murmured as Viffy nodded twice from beside the satyr.
And it is far, far more than I can afford.
Viffy nudged the satyr on the shoulder with her armored elbow, and the satyr looked over at her, eyebrows drawn together. After a few quick hand movements, Chin Chesper drew in a deep, deep breath.
Right. The booty.
Coco let out a snort. Excuse me?
Our battlefield loot.
Chin Chesper said, rubbing his hands together slowly in a circular, contemplative motion.
Would you be willing to work with us in trade first? I believe we have some things that you may be interested in. I was hoping to use them as a bartering chip further on down the line, but I don't think I have the option of waiting for too long.
Yule nodded. I am willing to work on trade. You? I can dig it, Coco agreed, pouring himself another cup of coffee. But I am not moving until I have a second cup. K-bar tea is fine, but there is no replacement for the mighty calf bean. After finishing the entire pot of coffee in a quick trip to the latrine, both humans and Chin Chesper were on their way to a warehouse district, each being tailed by their retinue. They arrived at a far larger, deeply secured warehouse that had more soldiers than most villages around it, and Chesper stopped, turning to the two humans.
During the deep freeze, I acted in a form of banditry. I sent men under a letter of acquisition to assault a well-known military outpost just beyond Saltbrine, a port city. The outpost was an easy kill, attacking at night while everyone was sleeping and trying to stay warm. I lost half of my attacking force, and a further 150 men securing these items and bringing them here. I exhausted every source of magic and heavy lifting equipment to have this chip in my barter bag, and it nearly crippled my war effort by sacrificing horses and sleds in the hundreds moving them.
Chesper said darkly, crossing his arms across his chest as all the guards became aware of their presence, quickly forming up in front of the warehouse in tight formations of spear and pike.
If possible, I would like to trade this booty cash for as much support as you are willing to give me.
Let's see it, Yule said, crossing his own arms as he looked over Chesper's head. Nimmy, pull out a notebook and a pencil. Keep track of what we're working with. Nimmy nodded, smiling to herself as she quickly opened the flap of her sling bag.
Just be sure to tell me what to write down if I don't know what it is.
Open the doors!
Chesper bellowed, impressively loud for a satyr, and the formations of soldiers quickly dispersed to operate the warehouse doors. Chesper, Yule, Coco, and their retinues moved forward as the doors slowly began to rumble open, lights slowly flickering to life inside as scrambled magic casters flicked the spells to their holding sconces. It took a moment for Yule and Coco to figure out what they were looking at, but once enough light filled the warehouse, they both inhaled a sharp pull of breath. Mother of God. Coco sighed out in English, turning to look at the two long lines of vehicles. The mad bastard has no idea. Yule replied in English as he slowly uncrossed his arms, staring with naked dumbfoundedness at the armor sitting idle within. He stole an entire armored scout unit. Within the warehouse was not a mere assortment of humble Humvees and trucks, but an impressive strike force of mixed armor and troop carriers. Not only were there 20 AMPVs, state-of-the-art and top-of-the-line troop mortar and weapon carriers, but also 10 M1296 Dragoon infantry carriers, 10 M1126 infantry carrier vehicles, 3 M1200 armored knight wheeled security vehicles, 7 M1117 Guardian security vehicles, and a single ABV breaching tank. Why the fuck did they leave this stuff lying around? Coco asked aloud, stepping into the warehouse and looking around in awe. There is so much money sitting right here. It's an entire unit, Yule. Yule blinked once, then turned around to the Serbian behind him. Nimmy?
Yes.
Nimmy asked, her short, badger-like ears perked in alarm at the two humans' behavior. You need to run back to the unit and get every single dwarf down here, along with every truck we have. Send word for spare dragon wagons to get down here with a quickness. Full express, with every trailer available. Do you understand me? Yule said in a tone of voice that Nimmy had never heard before. The serious edge to the words made Nimmy feel even more alarmed at the gravitas of the situation, and she nodded quickly.
Of course. Yes, Chikily, Eris, come here. Quickly!
While Nimmy started outlining what she wanted the two harpies to do, Yule stepped inside the warehouse, looking around at the nearly brand new armor with appraising eyes as Chesper walked up beside the man. His hooves knocked softly on the wooden boards, and the satyr placed his hands behind his back as Coco let out a shout and climbed up onto a dragoon. Yule! It has a 30mm and a full combat load! They didn't even get to use them! Coco called out, ripping open the hatch to the turret and wriggling inside like an excited ferret.
How did I do?
Chesper said with a pleased smile, taking a few steps ahead of Yule so he could turn around and face the tall human. Yule glanced down at the satyr, his face calculating. I think we may have to make up an entire new package for you.
Glad to hear it.
Chin Chesper said with a wide, toothy grin, then offered a palm-up hand to the armored vehicles around them.
Take it all if you wish. Just credit me with the time it is worth.
Yule took a few slow steps forward as Coco let out a victory cry, popping out of the turret with a bag of glow sticks and a pair of tablets. This, my friend, will have you set up for a couple generations in the least.
I'm sure we can discuss it when we sign the papers you have for me.
Chin Chesper said with another self-satisfied smile, then clapped his hands together.
Glad to see losing 750 men was not a waste.
And Yule started, then shook his head with a short jerk, looking down at Chin Chesper. 750?
Most of them were bandits.
Chin Chesper said as he shrugged callously.
Victory will always have its costs, and I knew that my entire claim rested on having something to bargain with once you arrived. It is only a shame those flying machines thwarted my other attempt.
Yule eyed the satyr with a new air. There was something kin-like in another leader that knew the cost of victory, and the satyr was quickly warming up to him, if just being a little more ruthless than Yule would have liked. While half of Yule's engineering corps made a beeline for the warehouse, as well as half of his human troopers, Yule and Coco signed Chin Chesper to a very lucrative and generous contract. After all, the satyr had just handed them over an entire armored scout unit. The dwarves were besides themselves when they understood what had been handed over into their strong fingers. The AMPVs were not only up-armored with reactive armor tiles, but one of the vehicles was a mission command variety, laden with sensors and advanced technology that the dwarves and Brimtouch were having a real headache in understanding. Most forms of them came in from damaged vehicles, and the DJ-93 Abrams hunters left very little to work with. This, however, was a pristine, untouched example, and was en route to Karis Vale before the ink had dried on Yule's contract with Chin Chesper. While there was no way to make any use of the GPS systems on the vehicles, one of the strikers was a command variant and laden with the brand new communications systems that not even Yule recognized. Yule and Coco spent an entire day just messing with the vehicle and reading manuals, slowly understanding that this single striker had the ability to track, mark, and plan the movements of entire battalions all at once. While they both chewed quietly on stolen charms from the boxes upon boxes of MRE Pluses, they started probing. The manuals warned them of a reverse ping that could happen if the enemy was looking for scans, but Yule and Coco decided the information was worth the risk, clicking on the ProBar linking system for a single minute. The system hummed to life, linked up with an enemy drone that was flying 100 miles to their south, and pinged. The drone was alarming to both of the humans, but their eyes narrowed as every single command vehicle blipped onto their mapping systems. Yule and Coco rapidly took notes, then clicked the system off after only 20 seconds. They're looking to push north through the scattered holdings, but we have more men here, Coco said, tapping at the map he had laid out on the little command desk inside the vehicle. If we push hard, south, we can maybe cause them to reconsider. It would give Nosham time to get ready for what's coming at him. Yule pressed his lips together in a scowl, slowly tapping his pencil against the desk. Nosham needs every minute we can get him, and the Oni is going to have a lot to learn when it comes to guerrilla warfare. But you and I can't ignore what we saw. The aircraft? Coco asked, looking at his notepad. We can have our Cheyennes and Tweets harass them. Not the Apaches or the Blackhawks, Coco, Yule said lowly, and set his own notepad down onto the table, tapping at 10 entries. Command and catch units for the Obedient. They are all on this side of the map, and pointed at us. Coco set down his pencil and rubbed at his face, his hands rasping across the aggressive 5 o'clock shadow that tickled at his jaw. Do you think it involves the cage? The cage had been found inside one of the AMPVs, a large iron-laced holding cell with 5 dangling power cables hanging from the top of it. On the deck of the AMPV had been 5 footlocks to hold something with feet in place, as well as 5 pairs of arm racks to hold something fast. Yule sighed, rubbing at his eyes with his thumb and forefinger, then leaned back in the command seat of the desk. I'm getting tired of magic. It ruins war, makes a mess of soldiers. You're just mad people keep teleporting around you, Coco said with an air of humor, even though his eyes and face shone with ennui. What do we do then? Yule was quiet for a long time, staring at the map while his eyes carried west toward the Nullbecken and the Yaltang leading range. The silence carried over the two of them, the air of the two men who would decide the lives of tens of thousands over what they thought was the right thing to do. Yule and Coco looked at their notebooks, their ledgers, taking note of men, armor, vehicles, then looking back at their reports on where the enemy was laying in wait. Yule broke the silence, setting the pad of his finger to the map. We come down hard, here, in between the Mother's Force and the Kingswood. We bite them hard and deep, force them west, all while pushing another wing of our forces along the bottom of the Savage Wood. We can't wrap them, but we can stretch out and keep them from spreading. We're going to need to be highly mobile, Coco murmured, tapping oars. And these maps are never to scale. This whole area is riddled with little villages and towns, and some of which don't like us very much. Yule snorted. Tell me about it. We can't even rely on the North to come to our aid with all the naysayers. Regardless, we're going to need help with whatever lives over there near this Yaltang place. Our little war is highly contained, but if we fuck up, it's going to break loose like a bunch of gremlins finding a water fountain, Coco said, then leaned backwards when 2 pairs of flapping wings made a racket outside of the striker. He smiled, then stood up, walking towards the rear hatch. Kip, over here, bud. Eris, however, rounded the corner, holding the smaller sparrow harpy by his flight harness with a none too bemused look on her face. Yule stood up next, closing his multiple notebooks. Set the rat down, Eris. Don't call him a rat, he's just scrungly. Coco laughed out as Eris released the sparrow harpy with a click of her wing claws. The two shared a brief, angry conversation in Harpish, then both produced multiple scrolls and letters. Commander's work is never done, Coco sighed out, taking the letters and scrolls before opening them up. Yule leaned past Coco, taking his own letters while giving Eris a Twix bar. Word. Feels like I've written more by hand here than I've ever written in my entire life. And that is the final numbered chapter of the Veil Riders, Book 4. Next up is just the After Action Report, and that's going to wrap up the 4th book of our Veil Rider series. If you like this story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbro's Field Desk. Share the stories with those you think may need them, may like them, may desire a distraction, or something to make their workday go by just a little bit faster. If you really like the stories, want to keep things going here, you can join us on the Coffee and gain a membership. And the memberships give you special, channels on the Discord, the member chat, as well as me or Larissa saying your name in the videos. There are those who go above and beyond what's required of most viewers and help hold the channel aloft on their shoulders, and those guys are our first shirts. That's Silver Cerberus, Decimus, Scandrin, Ebon Kitsune or Kitsune, Nessence, Jarnhu, Marquess Theodoric, Savage, the other Killjoy, Calistrad, Aaron Wilbur, Werewolfengeist, eventually, soon TM, E. Machino, Cody Jarrow, Death Dancer, and our very first shirt, Insane Medic. Then there's those who want to do what they can, and they give $25 per month. That's the E4 Mafia, Sleepy John, Lone Burrow, Valk Bambi, Shadow Man, Baiko, Damon Bane Plays, Drew, that one Stady R, Chiba Chigoni, Inquisitor Matt, Hellhound 23, Noxvok, Tab, Daz Linder, Sonic Arrow, Darkside, Kiwi Bastard, Lacune 8, Lacune, Matty Boy, and our very first E4, Crusader of Florida. Then there's Snuffy Squad, who just want to give something to the channel. You know what? $5 in a view is a fucking tantamount amount of stuff. Even just for those, it's all you can do. It's still more than I could ever ask for. That's Tiragron, yeah. Sorry. Tiragron, Antalis, Robbie Smyers, World Class Chibi CV, Moonshot 421, John Doe 4321, Gonkus. I fucking love Gonkus. That's a fucking funny name. Anthony Garcia, Emperor Dipshit, Meon Coy, Fafnir 13, Toyin, Martel Martlesby, Sir Martel Martlesby, Noodle, Alan Solano 9, Split Iris Bear, Mika, Scott Anderson, Verdi the Fox, Damian McEwen, Supersting 64, Elderock, Croman, Dalek, Jules, Blonde Lord, Thresh Vega, Devin, Sean Holtz, Andrew N. Gill, Yutta Potato, Skelters, Kite Zero, Classic Cthulhu, Diesel Dog, Coffee Commander, Anto Duncan D, and our first Snuffy Boy, 13.2 by 14mm Ein, or also called Ein, the Lore Smith. And until we see you next time on this side of the veil, all the way over here in fucking Timbuktu land, that was Simba, that was Hailey, proofread by our proofreader Franners, and this is Garbro's Field Desk. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.